When I read Ralph's book, The Cancer Industry, it just sort of opened up my whole world into this world. And I was always interested in reading nonfiction and those kinds of writings. And there was a little chapter on Brzezinski in his book, The Cancer Industry, which was published, I believe, around 1980. And that guy, Brzezinski, had just gotten started. And it just intrigued me. And that's what sent me down the path to make the Brzezinski documentaries. And what's exciting for me about making this film is sort of bringing back it around full circle, to read his book and to become friends with him later and help work together in telling this story. It's really kind of exciting for me. So.
It appears that Sloan-Kettering wasn't crazy about Laetrile because it wasn't performing as well as, say, chemotherapy. And if it doesn't perform as well, then there could be lawsuits against the company, and then, because it doesn't work, and then they go out of business. Your comments.
I'll let Ralph comment on that as well. But if you remember, like during the press conference that I had the audio recording, he was pointing out that actually the mouse model that they tested, chemo had no effect ever. And Laetrile was the first thing to ever have any effect.
The scientists involved had made what you could generously call errors in the report. The most glaring error was they said that all of the chemotherapy that is currently in use against human breast cancer could cure or cause objective anti-cancer effects in the mouse, and that Laetrile could not cause any anti-cancer effects in the mouse. So, therefore, Laetrile was obviously much worse than standard chemotherapy. Now, this was an out-and-out lie. It could not have been a mistake, because the man who wrote the statement himself proved that no known drug could cure or even partially relieve cancer in this mouse. Their own papers proved that chemotherapy didn't work in this system. There's two implications to this. If Laetrile did indeed have the effect in mice, then Laetrile is in fact better than all the known anti-cancer drugs.
Why would they be against it?
Well, I'll let Ryan want to answer this one, Ralph. It's yeah.
Well, yes. I just want to say about the relationship between chemotherapy and Laetrile. They hid the fact that in this mouse model, CD8F1, they had already tried chemotherapy. I'm repeating what Eric said, but they had already tried it, chemotherapy, 8 different kinds of chemotherapy against the tumors in this mouse model, and none of the chemotherapy had worked. They hid that, and they said, when I went back in 1977, I looked at the papers, I found that they had shelved this mouse model as a testing ground for new drugs because it was too difficult. They couldn't cure anything with it. Then, I think in a prejudicial way, they brought it down off the shelf and they tried Laetrile against it, and much to their amazement, it had a strong effect on the spread of cancer. But you know, here's the interesting thing is that in the animal studies, Laetrile really never cured any mice. It never had a strong effect on the original tumor. It could slow the development of the original tumor, but the main thing was that it stopped the spread of the disease. Nobody was proposing at that point that Sloan-Kettering used Laetrile on its patients. That never was an issue. So there was no fear of lawsuits for using it instead of chemotherapy. That wasn't on the table. That could only happen after a series of clinical trials that would have established its effectiveness. So no, there wasn't any fear of legal repercussions to them vis-a-vis using it, because that was the issue. Was not the issue. The issue was always at the level of the institute, Sloan-Kettering Institute. What were the research results with this? And then things would have progressed differently had they acknowledged the success of this compound in their research. Then that would have affected the national debate over legalization of Laetrile and the whole public attitude towards it. So it is also not necessarily that this is a contest between chemotherapy and Laetrile. I mean, sometimes complementary treatments can be used alongside conventional treatments, and the results are better than you achieve even with one or the other.
And the last thing I'll add, and I'll get you, is that, Laetrile is a natural substance, and if they just let people go with it and let people do their own thing with it, any doctor could make it in their office. There's no way to regulate it. There's no way to maintain control over it. And it wasn't until they went to Washington, D.C. for those meetings that it's essentially the direction to cover it up wasn't Sloan-Kettering. It was the people in D.C. that put pressure on them to bury this, essentially. So you had your hand up earlier. The question was, the local health food stores do sell apricot kernels, and I'm going to let Ralph answer that as well. I've actually eaten apricot kernels too, and I was interested in this. There hasn't been any sort of a formal clinical trial with people eating apricot kernels versus not to see if their cancer goes away, but that's sort of the theory, but I wouldn't necessarily, promote that. I'm going to let Ralph talk about that too.
The Laetrile that was tested at Sloan-Kettering was given to the animals in an injected form. As long as the injection avoided the gut, Laetrile was safe. And this was also seen in some of the human clinical studies. A properly prepared form of amygdalin or Laetrile injected seems to be a harmless, or as close to a harmless substance as we get in medicine. Taken by mouth, though, it's an entirely different story, because in your digestive system are certain bacteria that make the enzyme beta-glucosidase that breaks the Laetrile apart and liberates cyanide. So it's really not safe to eat apricot kernels. But the question is, at what level? How many would you need to eat before you got sick? And we don't know the exact answer to that. It's just that we know in principle that eating apricot kernels liberates a small amount of cyanide. The body has the capacity, usually with another enzyme, to be able to detoxify that cyanide, but cyanide's a deadly poison. So for that reason, and for others that we could go into, I personally am not an advocate of people eating apricot kernels. I don't think it's a safe thing to do. There are other agents that also have promise in terms of prevention of cancer that don't have the potential to kill you the way that apricot kernels do. If you ate a whole bag of apricot kernels, you'd die. So, and we don't know what the cutoff point is for any individual in terms of how many would be safe, and there's no compelling reason for anybody to eat apricot kernels or to take Laetrile preventatively, so I'm not in favor of that. But yes, some of the same chemicals, of course, are present in the kernel as are present in the finished product of amygdalin.
I know that Dr. Krebs, who developed Laetrile, was most interested in finding proof or refutation for the unitary or trophoblastic thesis of cancer based on research and work by a Scottish doctor along the early 1900s, I believe. No one, to my knowledge, has been able to refute that, and I wonder if you're aware of it and whether you feel that the stem cell research that is ongoing now, currently, might in some way confirm that trophoblastic theory of the cause of cancer.
Well, it's something I've been very interested in over the years. The trophoblastic, the idea that cancer is a kind of almost like a stem cell or germ cell of normal nature or origin, and I've written articles about this and about the history of the Laetrile movement, but I don't think it's true. I think that in order for that theory to be true, and I'm not going to, obviously this is not the place to go into any great details about this, you'd have to be able to show that the hormone associated with the trophoblast, which is HCG, is present in all cancers. And there's a little bit of data to support that idea, but most of the scientists whom I believe and whose work I trust can't find that hormone in excess in all cancers. Now, some people, do find it in about 70% of cancers, but it's at a very low level. So I don't think that theory is going to pan out, although I do think that, it's a very interesting, as with everything that Krebs did, there is an element of truth to it, and there is a touch of genius to to the various theories that he put forward, but that doesn't mean that I have to believe everything that he said. And as far as the Panama clinical trial goes, I've never seen a publication that came out of that, and if it wasn't published, then there's no way for us to evaluate it. Well, the purpose of making the film, the main purpose, was to establish the facts of what happened at Sloan-Kettering in the Laetrile testing. As far as the motivation goes, we're more in more of a speculative area, but my strong feeling, and I think Eric's feeling, is that there's a very big economic motivation for not allowing drugs like this or substances like this to enter the marketplace. And Vodra, who was one of the top officials of the FDA at that time, put it more succinctly than I put it in my books. Who's going to buy a drug at $70,000 when they can get Laetrile for 75 cents? That's, to me, the essence of the whole problem. It's why we don't see clinical trials on a host of things that are potentially useful. Resveratrol from grapes, curcumin from the herb, the root turmeric, many other things that we can mention in natural medicine, which are readily available and are not developed. Laetrile was a sort of supercharged form of this because it became the object of almost like a cult-like devotion on the part of a lot of cancer patients, and therefore it became a challenge to the authority and control that the leadership of the medical and political fields had with the public. It was a true populist uprising, if you will, against standard medicine. So it had another dimension to it, a political dimension, where even if there wasn't the economic aspect to it, it would have been put down anyway, I think, because it challenged the leadership and control that these individuals had over the direction of cancer research and cancer treatment. But fundamentally, I think there was an economic motivation that this was upsetting the apple cart of the entire medical system. You don't see drugs of this sort, inexpensive drugs, coming in and being promoted, but we do see a lot of drugs now in the let's say the $70,000 to $150,000 category per patient per year. So there was huge profits being made and to be made in the field of cancer therapeutics, and Laetrile was going to destroy that or spike it or make it much more difficult to develop. And I think it was marked for destruction simply on those grounds alone, but also on the grounds that these were upstarts who were trying to hone in on the whole cancer business, and that couldn't be allowed.
If you can provide us some insight into Dr. Sugiura after the devastating press conference. You could tell he was towing the line. He was backing the company for what they said, but he was also defending his results.
Dr. Sugiura, do you agree with the conclusions in the summary statement?
What conclusion?
The conclusion that Laetrile, in effect, does not either cure or prevent cancer.
I agree. Of course, my results don't agree, but I agree what our institute said.
Why? If your results don't agree?
Well, I don't know why, but I think good.
Do you stick by your results?
Yes, I stick. I hope somebody able to confirm my result later on.
Yeah. So how is he after this press conference? Because he looks pretty emotionless. Was he devastated? Was he upset? Was he...
Yeah, what was Dr. Sugiura's emotional state? Well, he went on working at his laboratory, at Walker Laboratory, until his death, which occurred about 2 years later. I think he was 89 when he died. No, I think he remained basically defiant or affirmatory of his own results. And finally, they told him to stop talking about Laetrile. The last person who interviewed him was Gabe Pressman, at NBC News in New York, and he told him flat out, "I'm not allowed to talk about Laetrile." But all the reports that I heard back from him in the last 2 years of his life, he didn't change. He wasn't a political animal, he was a laboratory worker, a very good one, but he had done what he needed to do. He wasn't, I was very touched and very moved by his whole demeanor throughout the press conference, because that was a kind of pressure that is greater than any pressure I've ever experienced before or since in my career. And he really, given his age and his kind of shy nature, he really stood up under it to a tremendous degree and never wavered, never changed his tune about Laetrile.
The question was, how did I sort of acquire the documents and the footage and the challenges related to that? I'm the first person to have ever digitized that footage of Sugiura. I felt like if I couldn't finish the film, if I didn't get a hold of that press conference footage, you can't just say what happened. I needed to find it. So yeah, it was challenging, but I did manage to find it. And then as far as the documents go, they were basically in the hands of Ralph for years. Of course, those are the original documents that Sugiura had leaked, given to Ralph to leak. And of course, the meetings in DC, those were taken from Freedom of Information Act that were done back in the 70s that still sort of floated around internally amongst people like Ralph. So I hope that answers your question on that. Yeah. Yes, ma'am? I think Ralph's the perfect person to answer that question. What other therapies, in your opinion, look promising?
Well, in December of this past year, Science Magazine chose cancer immune therapy, as the discovery of the year. That's the discovery of the year in all of science, not just cancer. It's all of science, geology, astronomy, everything. Cancer immunotherapy came up as the #1 finding of the year 2013. And in May or June of this year, we're going to have the results of as many as 5 clinical trials using a certain new forms of immune therapy. And some of these may make major headlines around the world because there's great hopes and great expectations about this. Lloyd Old, who you saw in the film, was the mastermind of this development. Lloyd Old spent literally 50 years in the background quietly promoting the growth of immune therapy for cancer. That's to say, using your own immune system to attack the cancer. I went to his memorial service at Sloan-Kettering a few years ago, and it was said at that meeting that he had himself had directed $200 million towards the development, not his personal money, but foundation money, towards the development of cancer immune therapy, and more than 1,000 workers in the field had been quietly trained at Sloan-Kettering. So I would say, hands down, that immune therapy is the most likely avenue that's going to be developed now in terms of cancer. The other one that's dear to my heart and that I think goes very much along with immune therapy is heat therapy or hypothermia. This is not so much used in the United States, very limited approval from the Food and Drug Administration, but growing quite rapidly in Europe and in China and in other parts of the world.
The DVD of this film this film was 75 minutes. The DVD extras have another 75 minutes of all these little short films and chapters that go into some of the things Ralph was talking about and some of the parallel things that were happening at the same time. As you can imagine, there's more to the story than just that. So I just want to let you know if you're ever interested. The question was, do we know the results from the Laetrile in the Mexican clinics? You want to take that one too?
No. What the results? No, we don't. We don't have any idea because none of the Mexican clinics have ever published even so much as a case series of their results. So we're really in the dark in terms of what these effects would be, and it would require an injection, no pun intended, but an injection of a higher level of scientific sophistication into that situation, if there was even willingness on their parts to have their work evaluated. But the short answer is we don't know. I want to make clear that I do not buy into the standard explanation for how Laetrile works. I honestly don't think that, in fact, the cyanide in Laetrile has much, if anything, to do with the activity of Laetrile. I'm very impressed with the work of a basic scientist in Barcelona, Spain, by the name of Juan J. Perez, who removed the cyanide from the Laetrile molecule and got the same, in fact, better results in his laboratory studies than he did with the original Laetrile. This is one of the reasons that I think there's something else going on with this molecule other than what we were led to believe in the 1970s. And the best guess for what this is that Laetrile appears to be a profoundly anti-inflammatory agent. It cools the inflammation in the body. This is why it was used in traditional Chinese medicine for thousands of years, because it suppresses coughs in people with lung conditions. And that's its peach kernels. That's it. The original use of peach kernels was to suppress coughs. And Perez's discovery in the last couple of years that it has this profound anti-inflammatory effect is in line with that traditional use. So I think there's a whole nother wave of studies to be done on Laetrile, but we need to sort of clear the air about what really is known and what's not known about Laetrile. And some of the most cherished beliefs of the 1970s will have to fall by the wayside, I think. But on the other hand, there's a whole new set of scientific facts ready to emerge. The National Cancer Institute has a whole department or division devoted to anti-inflammatory agents and how they relate to anti-cancer agents. So Laetrile could fit in perfectly into that sort of program, but it's the prejudice against it and the misinformation about it that's keeping the government from investigating that. But I think maybe with the existence of this film and my companion book, Doctored Results, which goes into great detail on the testing program at Sloan-Kettering, I'm hoping that this will clear the air to the degree that some good scientists will take this up again. But the short answer to your very good question is no, we have no idea really what the clinical effects with Laetrile have been in the Mexican clinics.
The question was the Summerlin mouse affair. Are we trying to suggest that people should be suspicious of Sloan-Kettering's science? The reason I included that was because that all happened right when Ralph got the job. Like, it was like the day he found out he got the job is when this thing exploded. So he was very excited to. I'm going to let Ralph answer this because he was the one that was there.
Well, I personally think that Dr. Good was blameless. He was a victim of his own enthusiasm. But I don't think that he was involved in falsifying the data in the Summerlin affair. He may have put a lot of pressure on Summerlin, but it was basically Summerlin's fault. I don't think that, again, paraphrasing what Eric said, the importance of the Summerlin affair was that it left Good in an extremely vulnerable position. When the American Cancer Society started to apply pressure to Good on the Laetrile issue was January of 1974. And that was the same time that the reports were starting to come back to Good that other people couldn't reproduce his results or his co-authored results with Summerlin on the painted mice, patchwork mice. So it made him very susceptible to backing off from criticism from the American Cancer Society because he was in the worst, most vulnerable position in his life at that moment. It just was an extremely unfortunate concordance of events. But we have, I think, again, I can speak for Eric, we have no animus against Sloan-Kettering, and we're not trying to cast any aspersions on the present-day status of Sloan-Kettering or Memorial Hospital. We think it's a perfectly fine hospital that people should not be prejudiced against, or we're not suggesting that they boycott it or anything like that. We think these are events that occurred in the past, and it would be very good for the sort of the karma of that institution if they would admit and acknowledge what happened back in those days, but people can still have their lives saved by the fine doctors and at Sloan, and there's no particular pattern of dishonesty associated with Sloan-Kettering, but it needs to, I think, for its own good, come clean on what happened, and then the science can move forward, as I suggested, in some very fruitful directions.
The question is Ralph doing reports on alternative medicine now?
Well, I have written a series of 22 book-length reports on the major cancer diagnoses. And these are sold over the internet at the website cancerdecisions.com. Those 22 diagnoses cover about 95% of all cancer cases. My fundamental attitude is that, first of all, people should not rely on alternative treatments when there are proven effective conventional therapies. That's my fundamental starting point. But I believe that there are cases in which you can integrate less toxic or non-toxic complementary treatments into your conventional therapy and get better results. And nowadays, very few people would argue with that. That was a highly controversial statement 20 years ago, but today, even at Sloan-Kettering, they're using massage and yoga and visualization and many things that were thought of as totally alternative. So I think where it becomes okay to use alternative treatments is where a person has a diagnosis that cannot be successfully approached through the conventional treatments. And sometimes people are urged to take chemotherapy, for example, with some types of stage 4 or very advanced or metastatic cancer, but there's no evidence for its effectiveness in terms of life prolongation, much less palliating the pain or other bad effects of advanced cancer. To my way of thinking, in a situation like that, the person would be well advised to look into what other alternatives are out there, because they're not going to lose anything in terms of life prolongation or survival. They may lose some money, but then again, they may lose money if they opt for experimental chemotherapy as well. But in all of my reports and all of my writings, I'm pretty careful to try to figure out what is actually valid within conventional medicine. And as I say, depending on the case, because somebody with the same diagnosis could stand to get a great deal of benefit out of chemotherapy, for instance, or very little benefit. So one needs to analyze each case carefully. But the major point of using the alternative treatments would only come into effect when the patient has no valid conventional treatment which could possibly save their life.
The question was the New York Times article that when Ralph leaked the documents to the New York Times. From what I understand, her name is Jane Brody, and she's still there now, isn't she? She's still at the paper. So here you go.
She's been there since the 1960s, and no, I never did reach back out to her. I think, I know I was deeply disappointed by that article, but it seemed to me to be so one-sided that I really didn't have anything further to say to her at that point.